AITAH for breaking up with my girlfriend after she went back to a party without telling me? You know, being in a new relationship always comes with that bit of nervous excitement. There's this little buzz in your gut every time you see them. A mix of happiness and worry, like you're hoping they're really as great as they seem. That you won't find some giant red flag tucked away, waiting to unravel everything. That's where I was with her. We'd only been dating a few months, but she'd moved to this small town not too long ago, and we hit it off almost immediately. She was easy to be around, funny, and smart. It just felt right. Dating in a small town, though, that's a whole different game. It's like living under a microscope. Everyone knows everyone, so there are zero secrets. You mess up once, and suddenly half the town's heard about it by morning. It's not like the city where you can slip into the crowd. Go somewhere new if things get awkward. Here, you see the same people at the grocery store, at the bar, on the main street. It's all one big circle. So, dating someone new? It means not just getting to know each other but also navigating this weird social terrain where everyone else is watching. Sometimes a little too closely. It didn't take long for her to meet my friends. She's a social person, fits right in, maybe even a little too easily. If that's possible, she was already on a first-name basis with half my group. We'd gone to some bars together, a few hangouts, and each time, she'd blend right in like she'd been here for years. Even though it was new, it felt like we were solid, like we were past the early awkward stages. So, when one of my coworkers invited us both to his house party that Saturday night, I thought it was a perfect chance for her to meet a few more of my friends and just, have a good time together. I liked the idea of seeing her in that setting, just relaxing with the people I'd known for years, letting her see a part of my life. It felt like another step, maybe something that'd bring us closer. We got to my coworker's place around 9. It wasn't some huge party, just a handful of people, mostly familiar faces, the kind of gathering where you know everybody by name, where you can relax without worrying about strangers or big, crazy scenes. The atmosphere was perfect, good music playing, drinks being passed around, and just that warm, laid-back vibe that makes you feel at home. I looked over at her, hoping she'd feel the same way, and judging by the way she was already laughing and chatting, she was right at ease. Honestly, it was great watching her fit in. She mingled like she'd known these people forever, laughing at jokes, throwing back comments with my friends like she was one of them. We started out together, catching up with people and sharing drinks, and it felt good to have her by my side. Seeing her interact with people I've been close to for years. There's something about seeing your girlfriend make friends with your friends. It's like a seal of approval on the relationship. We had a couple of drinks. Nothing crazy, just enough to loosen up and enjoy ourselves. And that's when she turned to me and suggested we go to the bar down the street. Now, I'm more of a, let's stay in and relax kind of guy when it's a small party like this. But she seemed excited, and, hey, it was a short walk, just a few blocks away, and the night was still young. So I figured, why not? Plus, I liked the idea of spending some one-on-one time with her away from the crowd. So we said goodbye to everyone, promising we'd come back later, and headed out. The night air was cool, and the town was quiet as we walked. I could tell she was in high spirits, a little buzzed, talking about how much she liked everyone and how chill the party was. She squeezed my hand, and in that moment, I felt like things were just clicking, like maybe this was what I'd been looking for. It was one of those easy moments that makes you forget the world for a minute. When we got to the bar, it was just as relaxed as the party. A few locals, dim lighting, music low enough that you could still talk without shouting. We grabbed a couple of beers and found a spot near the pool table. And that's when things started to feel really good. We played a few rounds, each of us getting a bit competitive and laughing way too hard at the terrible shots. It was one of those times where it felt like everything else faded away. Like it was just the two of us in this little bubble. Having a blast. Around midnight, though, she mentioned going back to the party. Now, I was already buzzed, a nice kind of buzz that made me want to head home. Maybe watch a movie with her or just hang out together without all the noise and people. I suggested we call it a night, maybe head back to my place to unwind, but she seemed set on going back to the party, almost insistent, and, honestly, I didn't think much of it. I figured she just wanted a bit more time with everyone, maybe she wasn't ready for the night to end. She said she'd drive me back home first, which made sense. I'd had more to drink than she had, and besides, she'd barely touched her second beer. So, I let her drop me off, still thinking she'd come over after. We said goodnight, and I told her she could just shower at my place if she wanted to freshen up before crashing. But she was pretty set on going back to her place to shower. So I didn't push it. And that was it. I watched her drive off, feeling a little disappointed but figuring I'd hear from her in no time. Once I was home, I kept checking my phone, half expecting her to text any minute with something like, on my way, or, be there soon. I mean, that's just what you do, right? You let the person you're with know what's going on, especially when you said you'd be back. So, I waited, grabbed some water, scrolled through my phone, and checked the clock every now and then. But then 10 minutes became 30. 30 turned into an hour, and still nothing. I thought maybe she got distracted or maybe it was taking longer than she expected at her place. but something about it started gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was weird she hadn't even sent a quick text. Just one message saying, "Hey, running late," or "I'll be there soon." That's all it would have taken to keep things from feeling so off. I tried to brush it off, telling myself she'd just gotten held up, or maybe even just fallen asleep. But as the hours ticked by, my patience thinned out. I couldn't focus on anything else. I'd scroll through social media, then refresh, then check my texts again, hoping to see something from her. My head kept spinning with questions. Did she forget? Did she decide not to come over? Each one made me more irritated, but I kept telling myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe she had a good reason. By 2 in the morning, I'd hit my limit. I was somewhere between pissed and anxious, a mix of worry and frustration that just kept looping in my mind. Then, out of sheer boredom and curiosity, I opened Snapchat, scrolling through my friend's stories. That's when I saw it, my buddy's story from the party. And there she was, in the background, laughing with a drink in her hand, looking like she was having the time of her life. I stared at the screen, feeling like someone had just smacked me. I mean, there she was, back at the party, having a great time while I sat around waiting like a fool. She'd said she was going home to shower and sleep. She'd even driven me home herself, but here she was, still out, not a care in the world. I felt this rush of anger and embarrassment. I was mad that she'd lied, and I was embarrassed because, deep down, I knew I'd let myself be played. She'd said she was going home, yet there she was, at the party she'd supposedly left, without even thinking to shoot me a quick message to let me know. It felt like a slap in the face, like she just didn't care enough to keep me in the loop. I messaged my friend, the one who'd posted the story, just to check. I asked if she was still there, and he replied right away with a simple, "Yes, skull." That did it. Seeing that made my frustration hit a new high. She was still there, hadn't even bothered to reach out, and was acting like nothing was wrong. So, there I was, 2 in the morning, stewing in my own frustration, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I could have understood her wanting to stay out, or even deciding to go back without me, but the silence, the lack of any explanation or heads up, that was what got me. It was like I was left out of my own relationship, left guessing while she made up her own rules for the night. The next morning, I woke up with that heavy feeling in my chest, like the night's frustration had boiled down into something sharp and cold. I hadn't heard from her, and that stung even more. I'd barely slept, running through every excuse I could think of, every reason why she might have gone back without telling me. But no matter how I spun it, it kept coming back to one thing: she'd lied to me. Eventually, I got a text from her, a casual, "Hey, morning," like everything was normal. It set my teeth on edge. I didn't want to come out swinging, but I couldn't pretend I wasn't pissed. So, I replied, asking where she went after she dropped me off, giving her a chance to come clean. That's when she started spinning her story. She said she'd gone home and accidentally fell asleep. I stared at my phone, almost laughing at the absurdity. I already knew she'd been at the party. I'd seen her in the background of that Snap story, laughing with my friends while I sat around like an idiot waiting for her to show up. But I let her keep talking, let her dig herself deeper. I just had to see how far she'd go with it. After a few back and forth messages, I called her out. I told her straight up that I knew she'd gone back to the party. There was a long pause, and then came the excuses. Her phone had died. She'd only meant to stay a few minutes. She lost track of time. I couldn't believe what I was reading. One excuse after another, each one sounding more flimsy than the last. I felt this tight, angry feeling in my chest. The lie itself was bad enough, but watching her try to cover it up, scrambling for reasons that barely made sense, that made it so much worse. It was like she thought I was dumb enough to buy any story she threw at me. I mean, if she just told me she went back, I might have been annoyed, but at least I wouldn't have felt so blindsided. And then, the kicker. I checked in with another friend who'd been at the party, just to get a sense of what went down after I'd left. I asked him if anything seemed off, hoping maybe he'd have some reassuring words, something to calm me down. But instead, he just told me, flat out, that he wouldn't trust her. "Don't get too attached, man," he said, and that sealed it. I sat there, fuming, trying to process everything. She'd lied to my face, snuck back to the party, ignored me all night, and then tried to brush it off with a string of lame excuses. My friend's warning kept ringing in my head, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't just shrug this off. Trust was everything to me. Without it, what were we even doing? By then, I felt like I was done. It wasn't about the fact that she went back to the party, it was the dishonesty. The way she tried to pull a fast one on me like it didn't even matter. I could feel this wall building up, a resolve that I knew I couldn't shake. By this point, I was running out of patience. I didn't want to play games, drag this out, or pretend like her excuses made any sense. I just wanted to get to the bottom of it, to know why she'd felt the need to lie in the first place. So, I called her up, trying to keep my tone as steady as possible. She picked up, sounding cheerful, maybe even relieved that I'd reached out. But I couldn't go along with her casual, "Hey, what's up?" routine. I got straight to it and asked her again, point blank, why she hadn't just told me she was going back to the party. She stammered a bit, still fumbling with the story she'd already given me, that her phone had died. That she only meant to go back for a few minutes. And that she'd somehow lost track of time. Hearing her go over the same excuses just made me feel worse. I kept thinking, why does she think I'm this stupid? It felt insulting, honestly, like she thought she could pull the wool over my eyes with a few vague lines and a smile. So, I cut her off and told her I'd seen her on my friend's Snap story. Clear as day. I even mentioned that I'd talked to other people at the party. And they'd confirmed she'd been there the whole time. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, to say the least. She finally dropped the act and admitted she went back. But she still tried to downplay it, like it wasn't a big deal. I just didn't think it was a problem, she said, her tone almost defensive, like I was the one overreacting. She insisted that she just wanted to hang out with friends and didn't realize I'd take it so personally. That's when I felt something snap. I told her that it wasn't about her going back to the party, it was about the lie. The way she'd left me hanging, the way she'd hidden it, the way she'd let me sit around all night waiting for her while she partied with my friends. And then, on top of that, she had the nerve to keep it from me and act like it was no big deal. I told her I felt disrespected, like she didn't value my trust. She tried to turn it around, saying that I was being controlling, that she didn't need to report her every move to me. And that's when I knew we were on totally different pages. It wasn't about needing to know her every step. It was about basic honesty and respect. And she just couldn't see it. I laid it all out, telling her that I couldn't be in a relationship where I had to question if she was telling me the truth. Where a simple night out turned into some elaborate cover-up. I told her I wasn't interested in playing games or constantly wondering if she was being upfront with me. She tried to apologize, saying it was just a one-time mistake, that she didn't mean to hurt me. But by then, the damage was done. The trust we'd started to build felt shattered, replaced by a sense of unease I knew I wouldn't be able to shake. I told her I needed someone who respected my time and my trust. And clearly, she wasn't that person. By the end of the conversation, it was clear we were done. There was no going back, no fixing what had been broken. She tried one last time to say it didn't have to end like this. But I told her that without trust, we didn't have a foundation. And that was that. After we hung up, I just sat there in silence, staring at the wall, feeling this strange mix of relief and emptiness. Breaking up with someone, especially when you thought things were going well, isn't easy. But the way she'd handled that night, the excuses, the lie, it left a bad taste in my mouth that I couldn't ignore. I kept replaying the whole thing in my head, wondering if I'd done the right thing. If maybe I'd overreacted, but deep down, I knew this wasn't just about one night, it was about the principle of it. About the foundation we were building on. Trust isn't something I take lightly. In my mind, if we didn't have trust, then we didn't have anything. I've always felt that honesty is the bare minimum in a relationship. And maybe that's a high standard for some. But to me, it's non-negotiable. The fact that she could look me in the eye and lie, then try to brush it off like it didn't matter, that told me everything I needed to know. Over the next few days, I went through all kinds of emotions. There were moments when I missed her, when I'd see something that reminded me of her and feel that pang of regret. That, what if, creeping in, I'd think about the fun we'd had. Those early days when everything felt so easy and carefree. But then, like clockwork, I'd remember how she left me waiting, how she lied and covered up something so simple, and the anger would come rushing back. It was like my brain was on a loop, swinging from regret to relief to frustration. It's funny, though, sometimes when you end things, there's this nagging voice that keeps questioning if you could have handled it differently. If maybe you were too harsh or didn't give enough grace. But this time, that voice was quieter than usual. I felt confident in my choice, like I'd taken a stand for myself, for my values. I wasn't going to be the guy who lets things slide, who accepts less than he deserves just because it's easier to ignore the red flags. And as I sat with that thought, the sense of relief started to outweigh the regret. A few friends heard about the breakup and asked what happened. I kept it simple, told them it just wasn't working out, that I couldn't deal with the dishonesty. Some of them nodded knowingly, even telling me they'd gotten off vibes from her, which honestly just validated what I was feeling. It's like everyone around me saw it before I did, but I'd been caught up in the excitement of something new, trying to make it work because I thought we had potential. But potential doesn't mean much if the basics aren't there. She was fun, sure, and we had a good time together, but if she couldn't respect me enough to be honest, then what kind of future did we really have? I realized that I needed more than just a good time. I needed someone I could trust. Someone who wouldn't leave me hanging, who wouldn't hide things or play games. The more I thought about it, the more I felt I dodged a bullet. Maybe breaking things off now, before we got in any deeper, was the best thing I could have done. I'd saved myself from the constant worry, from the mistrust that would have only grown if I'd stayed. And with each passing day, that sense of peace settled in a little more, reminding me that I'd done the right thing, that I'd made a choice to stand up for myself and what I valued. It wasn't the ending I'd hoped for, but in a way, it felt like a new beginning, a reminder that I deserve respect, that I won't settle for anything less than honesty. And as I moved forward, that's the thought that kept me grounded, knowing that I'd made the right call for myself, even if it wasn't easy. In the weeks that followed, things gradually got easier. I'd wake up some mornings feeling a bit of that familiar ache, missing the good moments we'd shared. And, sure, there were days where I'd question myself, wondering if maybe I'd been too rigid, too quick to draw that line in the sand. But every time those doubts crept in, I'd remind myself of the bigger picture: trust, honesty, and the simple respect of keeping someone in the loop, of not leaving them hanging. Looking back, I realize now that ending things wasn't just about what happened that night, it was about finally holding to my own standards. I've seen enough to know that without trust, everything else crumbles sooner or later. I've watched people I care about stay in relationships where they constantly question the other person, where there's always this undercurrent of suspicion. I didn't want that for myself. Life's too short to spend it second guessing, to be with someone who makes you wonder where you stand. I started focusing on things that brought me peace, catching up with old friends, picking up some hobbies I'd let slide, just reconnecting with my own sense of stability. Funny enough, the whole situation made me feel stronger, more sure of myself, like I'd proven to myself that I could set boundaries and stick to them. It's something I hadn't always been great at in the past, but now it felt like a kind of freedom. I'd learned to trust my instincts and protect my peace, and that felt like an accomplishment in itself. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets from mutual friends about her, about how she'd moved on, and it didn't bother me the way I thought it would. I was actually glad for her. It meant we'd both found our own way forward, on our own paths, no resentment or lingering regrets. I'd done what was right for me, and I hoped she'd do what was right for her. In the end, this whole experience taught me something about relationships that I hadn't fully understood before: the importance of aligning values. It's not enough to just enjoy each other's company or have fun together. At the core, you need to be on the same page about the basics: honesty, respect, trust. Without those, you're building on shaky ground, no matter how strong the chemistry might feel. So here I am, a little wiser, a little more self-assured. I'm still open to meeting someone, to finding the kind of relationship that doesn't make me question myself or compromise my peace. But until then, I'm okay on my own. I've learned that sometimes, standing up for yourself means letting go, even when it's hard. And if that makes me the bad guy in someone else's story, so be it. I'll keep being true to myself, choosing my own sense of self-respect over anything that doesn't sit right with me. Because at the end of the day, I'd rather be alone than with someone who leaves me guessing. And that choice, that commitment to my own peace of mind, feels like the best thing I've done in a long time. AITAH for refusing to rebook a weekend trip which my wife prematurely canceled before exploring all options? You know how there are some places that just feel like a part of you? That's what this city is for my wife. She's loved it since she was a kid, and it's always had this pull on her. I'll never forget the first time we went there together. She'd walk down every street with this look in her eye, telling me stories about family vacations, the memories she made with her parents. They're both gone now, but that place, it's like they're still with her there. And there's this one hotel that's a big part of those memories. She's mentioned it so many times. I could probably give you a tour of the place without ever stepping inside. So, when we found a flash sale for this trip months ago, it was like a sign. We both jumped at the chance to go back, and she was ecstatic. I mean, I was excited too. It's a great city, after all, with tons to do and see. But for her, this was different. It wasn't just a vacation. It was like this chance to relive all those memories and make new ones with me. I think that's what got me the most. Honestly, knowing that she was excited to make those memories with me, it made the trip feel like more than just a weekend getaway. We booked everything almost immediately: the flights, the hotel, well, a backup hotel, because the ideal one was full, and even a few activities. We started counting down to the trip, joking about it every morning, ticking off each day. It felt like this little secret we shared, just the two of us, building excitement together. And even though we were just going for the weekend, we planned it out like it was some kind of grand adventure. Of course, there was one catch: the hotel. That hotel she loves so much, with all those memories attached, was completely booked. They put us on a wait list, which wasn't ideal, but we kept hoping a room would open up. I tried to keep her spirits up, reminding her that even if we stayed somewhere else, we'd still be in her favorite city. And that was what mattered. We'd still be together, making memories, right? But I could tell she was a bit disappointed. For her, it wasn't just about being in the city, it was about being in that exact spot. The one that made her feel like a kid again, like her parents were still around. We'd talk about it almost daily, speculating about whether we'd get that call from the hotel. And each day that passed without any update made her mood a bit more subdued. It was subtle at first, like little hints here and there, a sigh when she looked at the calendar, or a quiet "we'll see" whenever I mentioned the trip. I thought maybe it was just pre-trip jitters, or maybe the reality sinking in that she might have to let go of the perfect plan she'd been holding onto. But as we got closer, the shift was undeniable. The countdown we'd started with so much excitement felt more like a clock ticking down on a missed opportunity. And I think that's when I started to worry. As the days got closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I'd bring up the trip, her excitement just wasn't there. We were supposed to be counting down to this amazing weekend together. But instead, she looked more and more distant, almost like she was preparing herself for disappointment. It was strange. Normally, she'd be the one hyping me up, getting all the details in order, and making sure everything was just right. But now, anytime I mentioned the trip, she'd just nod or give a small smile. It was like she'd already accepted that it wasn't going to be what she'd hoped for. And yeah, I understood the disappointment about the hotel. It was a big deal to her, something that carried all these memories and emotions. I got it, really, but I tried to remind her that the trip was still about us being together, experiencing the city again, and making some new memories. I even pointed out that we'd be able to go out, explore, eat great food, and do all the things we'd been talking about for months. The hotel's just a place to sleep, right? I said, maybe a bit too optimistically. Everything else we planned is still waiting for us. But every time I tried to reassure her, she'd just kind of nod and say, yeah, I know. I could see the frustration in her eyes. Though, it wasn't just about the hotel anymore. I think she was beginning to see the whole trip as a letdown. To make things worse, the person we'd lined up to check in on our teenagers backed out last minute. Talk about terrible timing. Now, on top of everything else, we had to scramble to find someone new to keep an eye on them while we were gone. I tried to stay calm, offered up some solutions, ran down a list of people we could ask. My mind was in problem-solving mode, trying to keep the plans from falling apart entirely. I thought if I could just get a few things sorted, maybe I could ease her mind a little. But it was like she'd already decided this trip wasn't going to work out. I felt like I was throwing lifelines, and she wasn't grabbing onto any of them. At one point, I told her, look, we're still going to have an amazing time. The city's what matters, not where we're sleeping or who's watching the kids. We'll figure that part out. But even as I said it, I could feel her slipping further away from the idea. I could see the weight of her disappointment, and I didn't know how to lift it. She'd say she understood, but I could tell she wasn't really hearing me. It started to get to me. Here I was, working to make this trip happen, staying hopeful, finding backup plans, doing everything I could think of to keep us on track, and yet, her attitude didn't shift. It was like no matter what I said, she just couldn't shake the idea that this trip wouldn't live up to her expectations without that hotel. Without everything being just right. And I won't lie, it hurt. I felt like she was choosing her disappointment over our time together. Like she couldn't see that the real point of the trip was us being together, not the perfect hotel or the perfect plan. But I kept pushing forward, holding on to this hope that she'd come around, that something would click, and she'd realize that even without all the bells and whistles, it'd still be special. Then came the moment that changed everything. A few days ago, out of nowhere, she turned to me and said, maybe we should just cancel. Just like that, calm, almost casual. I remember feeling like I'd been sucker punched. All this build-up, all the planning, the excitement we'd shared, and now she was ready to scrap it just because it wasn't shaping up perfectly. I kept hoping she just needed time to warm up to the backup plan. But apparently, that wasn't the case. I could tell she'd thought about it for a while. She started listing reasons why it'd be better to just rebook next year when another sale popped up. She said we'd save money, and it would give us more time to plan everything out exactly the way she wanted it. But all I could hear was her giving up on something we'd both been looking forward to. I tried to talk her out of it, to show her that the trip could still be amazing, that we'd still be together, exploring, laughing, making memories, but nothing I said seemed to land. Her mind was made up. All right, I finally said, feeling defeated, if that's what you want, then let's cancel. I didn't have it in me to argue anymore. Not when I could see she was already checked out. I told her it seemed premature, especially since we were still on the wait list for the hotel and we still had time to work out the plans for the kids. But she didn't seem interested in exploring any options. And to be honest, her insistence made me feel like I was the only one holding onto this trip. It felt like a slap in the face. Honestly, what hit me the hardest was the way she immediately perked up after canceling everything. It was like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She started talking about how we'd find an even better deal next year. How maybe by then everything would fall into place exactly as she wanted it. I just nodded along, feeling strangely hollow. She was happy again, and that should have made me feel better, right? But all I could think was how quickly she'd let go of something that had meant so much to us a few weeks ago. Part of me couldn't help but feel a little hurt, like the trip wasn't worth it to her unless every single detail was perfect. It made me question things. Honestly, here I was, fully invested, willing to compromise, to make the best of whatever we had. But for her, it was all or nothing. The hotel, the exact plans, every little piece had to align perfectly, or she'd rather not go at all. And I started to wonder if I misjudged what this trip really meant to her, or maybe, what it really meant to her in the grand scheme of things. But I kept those thoughts to myself. I told myself that if canceling gave her peace of mind, then maybe it was the right call, even if I didn't understand it. After all, we'd agreed to do what was best for both of us, and I didn't want to force something she wasn't excited about. Still, there was this lingering sting, this sense that I'd been left holding on to something she dropped without a second thought. Then, out of nowhere, 2 days ago, She came bounding into the room with this huge grin on her face, practically buzzing with excitement. I hadn't seen her that lit up in days. She held up her phone and said, "Guess what? The hotel called. Our room's available." I couldn't believe it. All this time waiting and finally, the one thing she'd been holding out for was suddenly possible. But as she kept talking, I felt myself start to pull back. I mean, she was acting like the entire trip had never been cancelled. Like we hadn't just hit the reset button a few days ago. And maybe I should have felt excited too. But I didn't. Instead, I felt this pang of frustration. Like, so now you're all in? Now that the perfect hotel came through? It felt like a slap all over again. Only harder this time. Without missing a beat, she launched into her plans for rebooking the flights, the activities, even the arrangements for someone to check on the kids. All these solutions she'd been so sure wouldn't work before were suddenly no problem. I was watching her fly through ideas and logistics, amazed at how fast everything could apparently come together now that her ideal was back on the table. I just stood there, listening, feeling this bitter mix of confusion and hurt. I mean, I had been pushing for those exact same things days ago, trying to find a way to make it work, to remind her that this trip was about us, not the perfect hotel, but she hadn't wanted to hear it then. Suddenly, the things that seemed like insurmountable obstacles were no big deal, all because we got a call from that one hotel. When she finally looked at me, expecting me to share her enthusiasm, I couldn't just go along with it. I told her, as calmly as I could manage, that rebooking everything now was going to cost us hundreds more than it had before. Prices had gone up on the flights, the activities, everything. I reminded her of our original conversation, where we'd agreed that canceling would mean we were letting go of the trip for now, and that we'd try again next year. She looked at me like I just doused her excitement in cold water. She couldn't believe I wasn't jumping on board. She started pleading her case, talking about how the trip was really about us being together, and how I should be more flexible, more willing to adapt. But all I could think was, where was this energy before? Just a few days ago, spending time together wasn't enough if it wasn't at the right hotel. And now, the way she was talking, it was like none of that mattered anymore. It hurt, honestly. It felt like I was only important when it was convenient, like she was only willing to make an effort once every single piece fell into place exactly how she wanted. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the fact that I'd been here, ready to go no matter where we stayed, willing to make it work because, to me, this trip was about us. But for her, it seemed like it was only about us if the circumstances were perfect. And now that they were, suddenly I was the bad guy for not wanting to throw our budget out the window and go along with it. She got defensive, accused me of being stubborn, of punishing her just because she'd needed a break from the planning when it was overwhelming her. But I couldn't shake this feeling of being taken for granted. It was like my willingness to compromise meant nothing to her unless it matched up with her vision of the perfect trip. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a hotel room or weekend away. This was about feeling valued, feeling like I mattered outside of her ideal plans. And right then, I just couldn't pretend that everything was okay, no matter how excited she was to rebook. After that conversation, I realized I had to set a boundary. I wasn't trying to be spiteful or prove a point. I just needed her to understand where I was coming from. So, I took a deep breath and told her, firmly but as kindly as I could, that I wasn't on board with rebooking. I said I thought it'd be better to hold off and try again in the future. Like we'd already agreed when she'd canceled everything. She looked at me, stunned, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her face shifted from excitement to something between anger and confusion. "Why?" she asked, almost like she was pleading with me to change my mind. And that's when I knew this wasn't going to be a quick conversation. I tried to explain it all. I reminded her of how, just a few days ago, I'd been the one trying to salvage the trip, the one suggesting alternatives, reminding her that we could still make great memories even if things weren't perfect. But back then, she'd been so wrapped up in the hotel and the ideal scenario that she'd chosen to let it all go. I told her how hurt I'd felt watching her brush off our time together. Like it wasn't worth it without the exact place she wanted. And now, with everything she wanted falling back into place, I wasn't willing to jump through hoops to make it happen. The look on her face changed as I spoke. She wasn't just confused now, she was hurt. She started saying that the trip really was about us, that the hotel was just a part of it, that she didn't mean to make me feel unimportant. But to me, it was about more than just this one weekend. It was about feeling like she valued our relationship beyond the perfect plan. I didn't want to be the guy who only mattered when everything else lined up perfectly. And now that I'd said it out loud, I couldn't take it back, even if it meant hurting her feelings. Then she said something that stung. "So you're refusing to go just because things didn't go your way?" That hit hard. I wasn't refusing because things weren't my way. I was standing firm because I felt like I'd already compromised, already shown I was willing to make the best of it, and she'd been the one to call it off. I told her I wasn't against us going on another trip or even trying again for this one in the future. But I wasn't willing to pay almost double for something we could have done if she'd just been open to making the best of things in the first place. She looked at me, really looked at me, and then started in on how it was unfair, how I was letting my pride get in the way. She said I was punishing her for what she called a moment of weakness. That she'd needed to cancel before because it was too overwhelming. And I was now refusing to support her because I wanted to prove a point. It was tough to hear, but I stood my ground, telling her that this wasn't about pride. It was about feeling like I mattered beyond just the perfect hotel. Beyond everything falling into place exactly as she wanted. In her eyes, I could see she thought I was being rigid, that I was the one making this more complicated than it needed to be. But for me, this was bigger than the trip or the cost of rebooking. This was about setting a line, about telling her that I needed more than just her excitement when everything was perfect. I needed to feel like we were in this together, no matter what. By the end of it, we were both drained, left staring at each other in this thick, uncomfortable silence. She'd accused me of punishing her, of being stubborn, but I felt I was standing up for myself, for what I needed in this relationship. I knew I couldn't just give in. Not this time, and as much as it hurt to see her so upset, I couldn't back down. The tension was thick, hanging between us like a storm that neither of us knew how to calm. She kept looking at me, eyes filled with this mix of disbelief and frustration. And then she started in again, saying things I hadn't expected to hear. "I don't understand why you're being so harsh about this," she said, her voice shaking a little. I was overwhelmed. Okay? I thought canceling was the right choice for my mental health, and I felt terrible about it. Now that things are looking up, you're just digging in your heels to prove some kind of point. That word, harsh, it cut deeper than I thought it would. I wasn't trying to be harsh. In my mind, I was just trying to set a boundary, to make her see how her actions had affected me. But to her, it was like I was punishing her for feeling overwhelmed, for needing to step back when things didn't go according to plan. And honestly, hearing her say it like that made me question myself. Just for a moment. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I get that you were overwhelmed. I get that the hotel means a lot to you, more than you even wanted to admit. But this was about us. About spending time together and making the best of it. And when you canceled without even exploring other options, it made me feel like I wasn't a priority. Like our time together wasn't worth the effort unless everything was perfect." She shook her head, exasperated. "You make it sound like I don't care about you. That's not true at all." I was trying to protect myself from being disappointed, from having this trip turn into something less than I wanted. "Can't you understand that?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my patience. "I do understand, but what I don't get is why that's more important than the fact that we'd still be there. Together, we could have made the most of it. And now, suddenly, when the hotel comes through, you're ready to make all these compromises that weren't even on the table before." She looked away, her face tense, almost as if she was holding something back. "So what? You're punishing me for canceling now? For feeling like I had to step back? You know this place means something to me. You know how many memories I have tied up in it. Memories I wanted to relive with you." I let out a frustrated sigh. "And I get that too. Believe me, but you're making this about me being rigid or punishing you, when all I'm asking is that you understand how it felt to be dismissed so quickly. Like my effort didn't matter unless we got that specific room in that specific hotel." She looked hurt, and I could tell that my words were stinging her, even though I hadn't meant them to. "I thought you, of all people, would understand what it's like to want something perfect for once. Something that isn't just making the best of what we have. This trip was supposed to be that for me." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us simmering in our own frustrations. I wanted to tell her that I did understand, that I wanted this trip to be perfect too, but that it was also about adapting, about being together no matter what the circumstances. And yes, maybe I was being a little stubborn now because I felt like I needed to protect myself from getting hurt again. From feeling like I was only a priority when everything else lined up. She broke the silence first. "You know, maybe I did have a moment of weakness when I canceled everything. Maybe it was a mistake, but I did it because I needed to take control of the situation. To feel like I wasn't setting myself up for more disappointment. And now that it's actually possible, you're shutting me out." The words stung because, deep down, I knew there was some truth in what she was saying. She had made a choice based on what she thought she needed. And maybe I was pushing back now because I wanted her to see that it wasn't just about her needs. It was about mine too. About feeling like my flexibility, my willingness to make the trip work, had been overlooked. "You're right," I said finally. "Maybe I am pushing back now because I want you to understand how it felt to be left out of that decision. To feel like my effort didn't matter. But this isn't about punishing you. It's about setting a boundary. About making sure we're both on the same page." She didn't say anything for a while, just looked down, her shoulders tense. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost resigned. "I don't want to lose this chance. Not because of some mistake I made when I was feeling low. But if that's what you need to feel heard, I guess I have to respect that." In that moment, I felt this wave of conflicting emotions, relief, sadness, and a hint of regret. Part of me wanted to reach out, to say we could figure it out, that we could still make this work. But another part of me felt like I needed to hold firm, to stand by what I'd said, even if it hurt. We both sat there, exhausted and emotionally drained, staring into the space between us. Neither of us had really won, but in a way, we both understood something about each other that we hadn't before. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but maybe it was enough for now. After that conversation, something shifted between us. There was no dramatic resolution. No clear winner or loser. Just an understanding, maybe, a sense that we'd both reached a place where we could see the other's perspective. Even if it didn't magically fix everything. The next day, things were quiet. We both went about our routines, each of us taking time to think. I'd catch glimpses of her around the house, her expression a mix of sadness and contemplation. And I knew she was still processing everything we'd talked about. I was too. Honestly, it's not easy to hold a boundary with someone you care about. Especially when you know it's disappointing them. But I felt like, for the first time in a long time, I was standing up for myself in a way that mattered. Eventually, she came over to where I was sitting in the kitchen, cup of coffee in hand, and joined me at the table. There was no argument left between us, just a quiet kind of acceptance. She reached out, her hand resting on mine, and we both just sat there in that moment, not needing to say anything. After a while, she spoke. "I get it," she said, her voice soft. "I see why this meant so much to you. And I'm sorry if it felt like I dismissed that. I was so caught up in making everything perfect that I forgot what was really important." Her eyes held a quiet honesty that told me she meant it. That she was genuinely sorry for how things had played out. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "And I'm sorry too," I replied. "I know how much that hotel means to you. And I didn't want to make you feel like your memories or your dreams for this trip didn't matter. I just needed to feel like I was a part of it. Like this was about us. Not just the ideal plan." There was a peace in that moment. A kind of mutual respect. We sat in that silence for a while, holding onto the understanding we'd found, feeling the tension finally release. Maybe this trip wasn't going to happen right now. But we both knew it wasn't about the trip anymore. It was about learning how to stand up for ourselves while still caring for each other. About setting boundaries and respecting them, even when it hurt. Over the next few days, we started talking about other plans, other places we could go. This time, there was no pressure, no high expectations to meet, just a shared sense of possibility. I could see that she was making an effort to be open, to focus on the experience we'd have together rather than the details or locations. And I felt myself doing the same, letting go of the lingering frustrations, choosing to move forward. In a way, this whole thing brought us closer. As strange as that sounds, I'd always known we loved each other. But now it felt like we were learning how to respect each other's boundaries too. Even when they weren't easy to accept. It wasn't the outcome I'd expected. But in the end, it was one I could be grateful for. Looking back, I think we both realized that sometimes the best trips don't involve leaving home. Sometimes, they're the journeys we take together, through difficult conversations and misunderstandings, finding our way back to each other in ways that truly matter. And as we sat there, both of us at peace with where we'd landed, I felt more connected to her than ever, knowing that we'd found something real, something that would last longer than any weekend away.